Today we are talking about the dumb, stupid, silly mistakes that some drone pilots make, and they happen more often than you would think. We're going to talk all about it. Don't go anywhere. Hey everybody, David here from Aerial Influence. Thank you so much for stopping by. First, you might want to know, who is this guy that's talking to me about drones? Well, I am one of the owners of a company called Aerial Influence. My business partner Michael and I started the company about 7 years ago. And what we do is we sell drones to like police and fire departments, public safety in general, agriculture. We sell drones to construction companies, all sorts of different businesses, but that's what we do. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We are here to talk about some of the silly mistakes that drone pilots make when they're flying their drones. And if you are guilty of committing some of these, don't be embarrassed. You would be surprised by how many people make these mistakes with drones, end up with crashed drones, end up with drones in a river. I'll talk more about that a little bit later. Well, the first thing that I see people do wrong is they get the wrong drone. And what you got to do is you got to know your budget and you got to know what you're going to use the drone for. So if you are somebody that's out there flying recreationally, you're just flying for fun, you're just kind of figuring out what drones are all about, I would go with something like the Mini 2, because you're going to spend like $300-400 on that. If you wreck it, it's not as big of a deal as if you wreck one of the more expensive drones. But if you want to fly more professional, you want to get some amazing videos, some amazing photos, you're going to want to look at something like the Mavic 3 Pro, which really is a professional grade drone. There's also the Inspire 3, which is even another level. And then you want to go up to the enterprise level. If you want a thermal drone, you're looking at $6,200 for the Mavic 3T, all the way up to $20,000-25,000 for the M350. So my point being, you got to know your budget before you go in and pick your drone, because you don't want to get a Matrice 350 if all you need is a Mini 2. Another mistake I see people making is not getting their FAA Part 107 license. It is an easy test. It's like a driver's license test about the sky. You have to learn the airspace. You're going to have to learn some things that you probably don't know about the airspace. All you got to do is put some studying into it. There are a couple websites we recommend. We're not affiliated with them at all. One is Remote Pilot 101. The other is Pilot Institute. I'll put links to them in the description below. But they are very good study guides. They also have practice tests, all sorts of good stuff. You can't go wrong with either one of those companies. They are very highly recommended. But after you do all your studying, all you got to do is pay a couple $100 to take your test, and then you are an FAA Part 107 licensed pilot. I am a firm believer that everybody should get it. If you are a drone pilot, if you're just flying for fun, you might as well get it, because you're going to need it if you ever want to fly professionally for any reason. If you're flying and you are not flying recreational for any reason, whether you're just getting video for your buddy's website or you are out there spraying crops with a drone, you are going to need your Part 107 license. So I really do think that every pilot should go out and get their Part 107 license, because then you're ready. If you ever have a chance to make some money, you are ready to go. Another mistake I see people making is not getting LAANC approval. This is the FAA's way of making sure that you are in legal airspace and you are flying at the right altitude in that airspace. So make sure you are getting LAANC approval. You can use an app like AutoPylot. We are not affiliated with them at this time. They have sponsored some videos in the past, but we really do just think it's a great app. You can get it for both Android and for iOS. So check it out. You basically put an address in. They're going to tell you if you are safe to fly in that location or not. You may have to change the altitude at which you want to fly or the radius at which you want to fly, but you'll get FAA approval if you're able to get FAA approval in that area. So check AutoPylot out. There are also a bunch of other apps that will do the same thing. Check it out on your app store, but make sure overall that you are getting LAANC approval. A huge problem I see, and we've all seen that guy out there flying like this, you get LAANC approval, you're all ready to fly, you're legal, and then you fly like an asshole. Basically, you're out there getting close to people, you're disturbing people at the beach, you're out in the mountain, you're disturbing wildlife, all those sorts of things. Fly safe, fly fun, don't bother people, don't bother animals, just fly like a reasonable human being. All right, so the next big mistake is you get LAANC approval, you're ready to fly in terms of the FAA, but you have not unlocked the geo zone. DJI does something called geofencing. So basically, even if the FAA says you can fly in a certain area, DJI could lock you off from that. That could be places like airports, that could be places like government facilities, that could be places like football stadiums when a football game is getting ready to go. But you might get FAA approval, but DJI says you can't fly. So you've got to unlock that geo zone. zone. You do that using DJI's Flysafe website. You can actually go in and DJI can unlock that zone for you if they're willing to do that, if they're willing to approve you to do that. But you got to think about that too. If you are going anywhere where you think DJI might be locking you out, make sure you check out Flysafe. I'll put the link down below as well. Make sure you check out Flysafe to make sure you're going to be able to get your drone off the ground when you get to your location. Another mistake we see people make is flying over cars and people, especially recreational flyers who haven't had those rules pounded in their head like the ones that have taken the 107 test. But we see them flying over cars and people. Don't do that. There are some rules you're going to have to jump through with the FAA to make sure that you're able to fly over people or cars. Look, drones have blades on them. They can hurt people. If you hit somebody with a drone, it's going to leave a mark, depending on what drone you actually use. They're all going to leave a mark, but some bigger marks than others. So make sure you know the rules before you're flying over people and cars. This is a mistake that I made. I had it in my head that you were allowed to do this, and turns out you're not. That is flying over a national park. So I knew that you couldn't fly from inside a national park, but I thought there was a gray area. I thought you were allowed to fly from the outside of the park and then fly over the park itself. So say the Smoky Mountains National Park, I thought I could take off right outside of it and then fly over the park. Turns out I was wrong. I actually posted something on Facebook, an answer to somebody's question saying like, yeah, you can go ahead and fly from outside the park. I was quickly corrected. I was totally wrong about that. That is just something I heard. I heard you were allowed to do that and I took it as truth and I shouldn't have done that. But don't fly over national parks. Whether you're trying to take off inside or from outside of the park, don't do it without permission. It is very, very hard to get permission from these parks to actually fly over them because you're disturbing natural wildlife and you don't want to do that. But it is very hard to get that approval, but that doesn't say you can't try, just don't fly over it illegally. Hovering over private property, come on people, you can't do that. Don't hover over private property. There is already this stigma about drones that we're like looking in people's windows and things like that, when the truth is 99% of the people that have drones are not trying to look in your bedroom windows. It's just not how it is. But if you go and you hover over somebody's property, you're really going to piss them off and you're really going to make them scared that you are trying to look into their windows. Now you have a right to fly at a certain height over somebody's house if you're traversing somewhere. You can do that if you're flying quickly over their house, but don't go hover in their backyard while they're in their swimming pool and get pictures of their daughter in bikinis. You just don't want to do that for several different reasons, but it's a really bad look. So don't go hover over people's private property unless you have permission. If you have permission to take photos or video of their beautiful property, then go ahead and do whatever you want to do as long as you've got FAA approval. But yeah, just don't go hover over somebody's property that you don't know or that might get upset with what you're doing. Ignoring temporary flight restrictions, that can get you in a whole lot of trouble. You've seen from people that go out and try to fly their drones during like football games or baseball games. Some of these people are getting in a lot of trouble because don't forget the FAA is a federal agency, so you're committing a federal crime if you break these rules. So the FAA has a website that lists all the upcoming temporary flight restrictions so that you know in your area if something's happening. Around here, the president came into town a few weeks ago and the temporary flight restriction was all the way out by us. We're like 42 miles from downtown Chicago and we ended up having a temporary flight restriction here. If I had tried to fly because it's a DJI drone, it wouldn't have let me take off. But there are other drone manufacturers that won't stop you from taking off in that situation, but you do not want to get caught flying during a temporary flight restriction. That is a big no-no and can land you in the clink. Now, another mistake we're gonna see people making is flying without remote ID. That is gonna be a big issue with older drones that don't have remote ID already built into them. The newer drones already have it built in, so you're not gonna have any problem there. But the older drones, you're gonna need to add a little module to make your drone legal. It's kind of like a license plate in the sky. People will be able to go to an app and see that you are up in the air actually flying. They're gonna know your location. There's all sorts of information they're going to be able to get. A lot of it is very controversial as to whether they should be able to get that information or not, but you're going to have to fly with that remote ID module. So don't go buy an old drone and then think you're totally legal to fly. You may have to add a remote ID module onto it. So I know the Autel Evo 2 version 2s and version 1s, you definitely have to add a module to. Some of them have been recently updated. The Phantom 4s have been updated with remote ID now. Mavic 2s have been updated with remote ID. Mavic 3s, of course, are updated with remote ID. So that's a really good thing. A lot of the consumer drones out there already have remote ID built into it. But if you've got one that doesn't have remote ID, you're gonna have to get one of those little add-on modules. I'll put a link to a couple of those down in the description. Not completing your firmware updates is another problem that people have. For whatever reason, they don't think to look at their firmware updates. So you gotta connect to the internet. You gotta look every once in a while. I suggest every couple weeks just to make sure that you don't have a new firmware update, because you don't wanna go out in the field and have firmware that is 3 generations old and then have some sort of issues, because then you're going to have to try to download out in the field through like a hotspot or something. That's going to be a big pain in the butt. But you want to make sure that you are doing those firmware updates on a regular basis. There's a reason they do them. It's not only to give you new features, but it's also like security updates, things like that that you're going to need for your drone. So make sure that you do those firmware updates. Not completing a pre-flight checklist. This is a big no-no, and I'm telling you from experience. I once was out flying a drone. This was a drone there you had to screw the arms in, flying for a client. I was talking to the client. I was unspreading arms, screwing things in. Totally forgot to screw one of the arms in. I answered a question and just stood up and forgot to screw the arm in. Well, guess what? I took off. Eventually, arm goes in. Drone crashes, embarrassing, very costly. But if I had gone through my pre-flight checklist, I would have avoided all of that. So make sure you go through a pre-flight checklist, check your batteries, make sure you're checking your props, make sure you're checking your arms, of course. Make sure all the stuff is done. Now, every click is clicked and every latch is latched on that drone to make sure you're gonna have a safe flight. The next mistake we see people make is leaving their batteries out in their car, like in the heat, and that's gonna cause the batteries to swell. So they come to us, 3 months after buying the drone and they say, hey, my batteries are swelling up. Well, do you leave it in the car a lot? Yeah, I do. That's why your batteries are swelling up. We see this a lot with public safety because they want to have the drone in the back of a squad car. They want to get out and get the drone up in the air as quickly as possible. So they leave it in the squad car all the time. Well, in the summertime, when the car's 100 and something degrees in there, the batteries are not gonna like that. So make sure you are not leaving your batteries out in the heat. And really, you don't wanna leave them out in the cold either, because that is gonna affect your battery life. It could stop you from flying right away. Actually, if the batteries are too cold, the drone is gonna want them to warm up before it will actually fly. So keep them out of the cold, keep them out of the heat. You want them in like regular room temperature temperatures. So yeah. Next up is relying too much on your sensors and getting too close to things. So people see all the sensors and they really are amazing. On most of these drones, there are sensors all the way around them, on top of them, on bottom of them, that are gonna tell you if the drone is getting close to something. So it's gonna give you an audio alert. It's also gonna give you an alert on the screen telling you if it's getting close to something as well. But sometimes people rely on the sensors too much. If they're flying at night, if they're flying even, at sunset and the drone isn't seeing, if those sensors can't see as well, it could run into something. It may not see those branches. It may not see those telephone wires. So do not rely too much on those sensors. Make sure you're flying away from things. Use your zoom lens, your zoom on your drones. Most of you have zooms on your drones. Use that zoom to get the shot you want. Don't fly closer to it. So don't rely too much on those sensors. Make sure that you are being smart and flying away from any structures or anything that is going to trip your drone up. I see a lot of this, people not waiting for GPS to actually lock into their drone. So they take the drone out, they turn it on, and they take off right away. Well, at this point, you're probably gonna get some notifications from your remote saying that you don't have GPS lock, but people will try to fly anyway. And when you're in that mode, it's called attitude mode, ATTI mode. And your drone is going to fly left or right with the wind. If the wind blows, it's just gonna continue to blow with it. So it's not a good idea. What you wanna do, get your drone, power it up, you're gonna wait like 30 seconds probably before it gets GPS lock for most places, but you are gonna get that GPS lock relatively quickly. So just hang on a minute before you take off. Don't fly in ATTI mode. It's a bad idea. ATTI mode is what people end up going into when they're indoors, because you can't get a GPS signal a lot of times indoors either. Go into ATTI mode and they're surprised when a little wind comes along and blows their drone into a wall or something. So just know that ATTI mode is a bad idea. Make sure that you are getting GPS lock before you take off. Letting your batteries run out on your drone. I just had this happen to a client not too long ago. They were out flying. It was a search and rescue mission. Battery was getting really, really low. It was telling the pilot, you gotta come home. The drone was notifying him that the battery was running low. He waited till it was at about 5% and decided he was gonna come back home. Well, when the drone got to a certain level, when it gets to 2%, it has no option but to land right where it is. So when it got to that point, the drone happened to land right in a river and destroyed their drone. So make sure you're not doing that. The drone is talking to you for a reason. So if at 20%, it says it's time to come back home, just come back home, pop another battery in and go right back out. You don't want to test this because you don't want your drone in a river. We see a lot of people wanting to fly in inclement weather, and while drones like the M30T or the M350 can fly in rain and snow, you don't want to take a Mavic out and fly it in rain or snow, not even a little bit. You don't want to do that with an Air 3 or a Mini either, because they are not built to take that sort of weather. So don't test it. Don't go out in a snowstorm with your Mini 4 and think you're going to get your drone back in one piece, because you're risking water getting into the drone, you're risking water getting into the camera itself, and just really messing things up. So my suggestion is do not take any of those drones out and try to fly them in even little sprinkles. I'm sure there are some of you at home saying, well, I did it, I flew. Fine, you did it, your drone was fine, but I'm just saying I wouldn't suggest it, because I would hate to see somebody come home with a drone that doesn't work anymore. Flying beyond your visual line of sight is a no-no. I see lots of these tests done on YouTube. Lots of people trying to get range tests, seeing how far they'll go. Don't do it. These drones have amazing range. I think for like the DJI drones and the Autel drones, some of them will have like a 10 to 12 mile range. Now, they're really not going to be that far. That's just what they're rated at. But you're definitely going to get 1 or 2 miles from these current drones, and you have no business flying further than that. You got to keep the drone within your visual line of sight to be legal, and really just to be safe and to not lose your drone. A lot of these things go back to not screwing your drone up. So don't fly beyond your visual line of sight. As tempting as it might be, make sure you can see your drone while flying. The last thing, and I know there are probably a lot more, but the last one I'm going to mention is don't fly drunk or high. Just don't do it. I know it's probably tempting to have a few beers with your buddies and then get your drone out and go fly it, but don't do it. You wreck, you hurt somebody, you're going to be in a lot of trouble, and you've caused somebody pain. So please fly sober. Don't be screwing around, flying high or something, going out and smoking a doobie, and then flying your drone. That's a really, really bad idea. Okay, so that's our list. That's my list. I'm sure you guys have a lot more things out there. Everybody has wrecked a drone. I'm going to say that right out front. Anybody that has flown a drone for any considerable amount of time has probably wrecked their drone, whether they cracked a prop or they ruined their drone completely. So don't be embarrassed. Tell me some of the stupid things that you've done with your drone. And we really, really appreciate you guys stopping by. Again, we sell drones for a living. Primarily, we sell the enterprise drones, but we can also sell the DJI consumer drones. So if you're interested, make sure you give us a call. You can see our information on the screen and in the description below. We'd love to talk to you. We appreciate you stopping by, and we will see you next time.